McNulty says this case needs a wire.
You think he's right?
It needs something.
Alex Cottrell and Toby Huntingford present Caught on the Wire. This podcast is an episode-by-episode analysis of HBO's widely acclaimed TV series about the city of Baltimore, its people, and its many problems. Find more information about the show and all the episodes online at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com. Hello, welcome to another episode of Caught on the Wire with me, Alex Cottrell, and Toby Huntingford. And we're up to episode 4, called Old Cases. So, Toby, are you feeling ready for the episode this week?
Oh, absolutely. I'm very excited. This is definitely the best so far.
Yeah, it is.
And I've got plenty to discuss with you, so I'm looking forward to it.
Lots of really kind of, very important, very well talked about scenes and moments in this episode in regards to the season as a whole.
It's surprising how many big scenes there are in these early episodes. Like, there's lots and lots of really big monumental ones that everyone remembers, and this episode is not short of any. So, yeah, very excited.
Yeah, we're also going to try out a sort of slight addition to our format, or rather an addendum to our format, I suppose it is.
Yeah.
And that's, we're going to change up how we structure the discussion section a little bit. So as we go through the recap, we'll talk about major story strands in the episode. And then after finishing one strand, we'll bounce off that for the discussion. And then when we're done on that, we go on to the next strand, just to kind of... Because otherwise, during our analysis, I think sometimes we would sort of throw things in as we thought of them, or stuff that we might have written down, and it wasn't that structured as an individual part of the show.
Yeah.
So I guess we wanted to make it make a bit more sense.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I think our discussions have been good, but they haven't quite followed the structure, have they? And if we were to use the recap as kind of a set of signposts, I think it would work a lot nicer. So we'll give it a go anyway and see how it goes.
Yeah, well, hopefully we won't sort of spoil an episode by doing it. Hopefully it will work.
Yeah, and if we do spoil it, we'll just go back to the old way.
Yeah.
I'm sure we won't.
Right, well, without further ado, I guess we shall move on to the recap, which you will be doing for us this week, Toby.
Excellent. Season 1, Episode 4, Old Cases. Kicks right off with a classic wire scene, as far as I like to think, the moving the desk scene. So, what was your take on this, Alex? Do you think it's as classic as it deserves to be?
Yeah, it's a very, very funny sort of opening scene, and obviously it's trying to show that you've got these officers who are all very sort of well-intentioned, and they're all trying to kind of get this desk through the door. But it's eventually made very clear that none of them really knows exactly what they're trying to do, and there's no proper communication, and it's obviously allegorical for what the show is presenting as a whole. And the fact that everyone is pulling in different directions, and even if people feel like they're doing the right thing by helping out, they're actually making a bit of a mess of it. And this is also shown later on. For example, Landsman defends McNulty to Rules to give him more time to finish this case. And he's kind of doing this well-intentioned thing, and it's a really nice scene. We'll talk about it later. But in actuality, he kind of messes things up for McNulty. Because, that case, it's not really connected to Avon, or at least when they're talking about it initially, it doesn't appear that way. So it's just another little example of everyone's pulling in different directions, trying to achieve different things, and not enough communication. And then alongside that, we have Freeman, who is sat there watching and knowing and not saying anything in the way that he does. Yeah,
I think it's definitely one of the most gorgeous metaphors in The Wire for me. Like, it's got the right level of subtlety, and it kind of goes on just as long as it should. Like, it's a surprisingly kind of disconnected scene from everything. But I think it's very clear what it's trying to say once you've seen it all. And it's genuinely quite funny, particularly when you see it all from Freeman's perspective, and you know that he has worked out from the very start what the issue is, and he's just sat there with his smug kind of half smirk, And it's like, yeah, this is really great. I don't know. I'm still got my reservations about it though, because I still think the lack of communication eventually starts to defy logic. Particularly when you see Sidner. I noticed Sidner pushes from both sides and still doesn't think to ask which way we're actually going. Like, and you know, it's kind of a weird one. So perhaps I'm sure it's very, very plausible as a scene, but after a couple of watches you start to notice more things about it, and it's like, does this quite work? I mean, it's still very funny, it's still a great metaphor, but it's got a few iffy things about it. So that'd be my take on it anyway.
Yeah, it's very much, the scene is there for its symbolism rather than, it feels one of those scenes that feels slightly detached from the world that it's creating, the kind of consistency of its realism. It feels like it jumps off a little bit for the sake of its symbolism, which is very effective and very cleverly done, but it can sometimes feel a little jarring with the rest of the drama.
Yeah, it works well because it's stuffed behind that credit sequence at the start. It's kind of its own little thing that they can get away with. So it's
quite an isolated scene because it's not really connected to anything. It's more just kind of, look, you're back with the detail. It's like a sort of, reunion.
It's almost like Snot Boogie. So Snot Boogie never comes back in the season, but everyone remembers him. So it's kind of that kind of level of disconnect.
I also thought it was quite nice that Herc just we just see the shot of the desk just stuck there, and Herc just kind of walks away and leaves it there. It just kind of feels like people just make a load of mess and then try not to admit any blame, just leave it and walk away, hope nobody notices. Like
that is true, yeah. That is very true. That kind of adds another level to it, doesn't it? That I didn't really think about, to the whole metaphor. So, yeah, very nice. Have you got anything else to say about that, or should we go on to our next scene?
Let's move on to the next bit.
Right. Well, so after the credits, we pick up with the trial of Marvin, and he's one of the drug dealers who was picked up during the raids from episode 3. And we quickly discover that he's willing to take any time in prison to avoid giving up Avon. And this proves McNulty's consistent claims that Avon is so influential that rolling people up to him, or even his close subordinates, is practically impossible. And this is in direct contrast to Carver's expectations of being able to force Bodie to give up Avon once they inform him that Mahone is near dead from the punch during the raids. So this defies the police's expectations once again, and Bodie is in fact nowhere to be seen once they arrive, because he's managed to escape an ill-managed juvenile facility near to Washington DC and hitchhike or perhaps carjack his way back to Baltimore. It's not made particularly clear, but that's kind of the first chunk of scenes from the episode.
Yeah. There's quite a few little things in there, isn't there? We kind of return to Greggs and McNulty and kind of their friendship that was sort of emphasised a little more in the previous episode. And it also comes to an interesting head at the end, where he obviously goes to see Greggs very drunk, and she's obviously kind of a little bit unnerved by him, so it kind of shows that there's still differences between them. Yeah.
No, true. That is quite tragic at the end, actually, when he you realise what McNulty's life outside his work amounts to.
Yeah.
Like with that awkward visit to Kima. They do like to throw in a couple of kind of tragic McNulty drunk moments at the end of these episodes, don't they? Just to remind you that he is an absolute kind of mess up of a person, really, despite all the competency you see during the episodes.
And Landsman says that as well, that he's kind of obsessed with himself, like
absolutely,
or addicted to himself, or something like that.
That was it. Yeah, he's addicted. Addicted to what?
Pog and Mahone, obviously, they're just kind of comic relief, really. I mean, they're very kind of quite sort of simple characters, really. But I think it's kind of interesting how Pog, like in relation to say Herc and Carver, Pog and Mahone's comic relief comes from the fact that they do nothing and that they're basically useless. And then there's obviously that sort of funny scene where they're in the hospital and Polka's the one in bed, isn't he?
No, Mahone's the
one in bed. The one in bed, okay. I can always forget which one is which.
Yeah, that is difficult, yeah. It's actually the last appearance of Mahone in the show, I believe.
Oh, right.
It's the first character to make an exit, a retirement exit, or at least a medical pension.
But he obviously has that bit where he says, you can't say we don't deserve it. And obviously the comedy comes from the fact that they are
that
useless.
Definitely feels... Yeah, that feels a bit below the show, doesn't it? But it kind of works because they're such simple characters. So,
but then Herc and Carver's comic relief comes from the fact that they try to do too much, and they kind of overthink it, and they try to sort of go that unnecessary extra step. and it's kind of interesting how they contrast each other. I thought it was interesting and maybe a little bit on the line for me where they literally drive pretty much straight past Bodie.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a little bit coincidental. Feels, again, it's another one of those sort of jarring moments that's there just for its symbolism, you know. Look, they're driving straight past their plan, kind of, you know.
It was nice, like from a cinematography perspective, like as a transition between the two scenes. Like it worked really well. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it's very coincidental.
And then, where did you get up to in the recap? Were we up to the bit where Bodie escapes Juvenile as well? That's
right. So we're basically, at the moment, we're trying to focus on the Bodie in the Juvenile Facility scenes and the Marvin trial, pretty much, and also the car journey that Herc and Carver share, where Carver enthusiastically believes that, you know, you can't knock him for his enthusiasm, that they're going to be able to roll up Bodie, and they've got all these great intentions of, you know, cracking open the case, with various scrotal incisions and trophy cabinets and stuff like that, which is quite funny. And again, that ties into the first scene, obviously, with well, not the first scene, but the one after the credits, where the desk in the doorway, about people going in with good intentions and just fucking it up anyway. Yeah. They do a lot of that. Yeah, nice. There we go again. So it all kind of ties back into this theme of just kind of incompetency again. So yeah, I think those scenes perhaps don't have too much depth to them, but they're on their own. They're quite a lot of fun. It's weird because there's very little actual kind of street level scenes this episode. I think the Bodie one is one of 3. We have one D'Angelo one, only one D'Angelo one later on, and then one Avon in the basketball court. Yeah. I think the rest of it's very, very kind of police focused. So yeah, it's a strange one. Should we go quickly move on to the next one? Yeah, let's move on. We come across. So we then see Jay imploring McNulty to investigate a murder that's tenuously connected with a D, out of desperation for clearances. And after being guilt-tripped about his absence from the homicide rotation, McNulty reluctantly agrees to investigate the scene. Bunker and McNulty expertly re-examine the crime scene, proving that they have a kindred rhythm to their police work, as they successfully work together using very limited vocabulary to make sense of the death and find some missed shell casings. We learn through a great monologue in the low-rises that D'Angelo is indeed the apparent killer in this case, meaning Jay made a very lucky call. So that strand is the Deirdre Crescent case, essentially, and it ties together kind of McNulty, Bunk, Jay and D'Angelo, really. And it also, of course, includes the famous fuck scene. So what was how did you feel about those set of scenes? So I think there's a good point where Landsman is trying to persuade McNulty to obviously investigate the case. Firstly, I think it shows us that Landsman is not totally useless and that he is sergeant for a reason. You know, he is still able to kind of pull out these cases, and like he kind of knows what he's doing. He is largely shown as just being a fat man who sits at his desk and reads porno magazines and eats a lot of sort of greasy fast food, and that's most of what we see from Landsman, I think, throughout the show. Yeah. And there's a nice moment between Bunk and McNulty where they both sort of antagonize each other a little bit. And Bunk says, "Oh, he's got you, Jimmy." And you kind of, there's a pause as sort of he looks to Bunk as like a little bit distraught that he's not on his side. But then we have another similar thing where Bunk says he has the call only moments later, and Jimmy says, "So call," in a sort of irritated voice. And Bunk looks to him in a similar way. They kind of, you can see that they antagonize one another, but that they respect each other enough not for it to, damage their actual police work. Yeah, kind of a nice little character moment between the two. I quite enjoyed that, and there was one rather horrible use of your classic catchphrases again. Yeah, there was. You're happy now, bitch. It's just, like, really just not unnecessary. It feels really unnecessary there. Like, that's a particularly bad usage of it. Yeah. So he just had this nice moment, and then we have our kind of badumch line at the end. Like, it's just like, that is not necessary. No, I completely. I think that's one of the last times I can remember it. Actually, that they're tempered down a lot after this. So it's good from here on out. what I guess we should go to the event itself, the fuck scene that is heralded across the wire community. What did you take on their re-examination of the scene?
So they do an excellent job of recreating the story that we've heard earlier from D'Angelo, essentially, where he tells the story of him, tapping on the window and eventually shooting this woman. And we see it again being brought to life in the scene by Bunker McNulty. And it's a very funny scene, purely obviously just because they use the word fuck, and we see their relationship between it, and they're able to express all these different emotions in one word. And obviously part of the value of it comes from the fact that the word fuck is so heavily, generally very heavily censored on American television. I think it comes from that kind of like, see, these words can be versatile too kind of way, which is true. And it's well,
it is the most versatile word in English, they say.
Yeah, it has plenty of uses, yeah. So we have to consider, like, this is another one of those scenes that we mentioned earlier where it's, jarring to the drama, but it has the symbolism that kind of overrides that. So the mechanic of the scene kind of overrides the drama to a certain extent. It does feel a bit like that way, to me at least. So I think it's a very amusing scene and really kind of well put together, especially re-showing that story that D'Angelo has told. But it does feel a little bit contrived for me, I've got to say. It just feels like it's trying a bit too hard, and it's a really long scene as well. It goes on for a long time. And rewatching it again, after about halfway through, I did feel a little bit like, all right, I got it. Like, I got it now. Yeah,
it hasn't got any rewatch value, unlike most scenes in The Wire. I think it's one of the scenes that suffers if you're a phantom rewatcher like we are. But I do remember the first time seeing it, I laughed very hard, harder than I ever laughed at anything else in The Wire, I think. And it was only halfway through the scene you quite realise what's going on, because there's so much cursing in The Wire anyway. You just kind of assume, oh, it's more cursing, but eventually it kind of takes over into this really weird kind of like detective mode where they just communicate through fuck. And I think it does a good job of showing how well suited McNulty and Bunker are, and that they've got this rhythm that they keep talking about, and that they're really putting it into action here. And again, like the camera work and the rest of it's so clever, because you can work out very easily what's going on, and the show doesn't have to make any effort in spelling it out for you through dialogue. So I think that there's some really, really very respectable parts to the scene. But I do agree. I certainly see where you're coming from. That the more you see it, the more it's like, okay, here we go again. I know what happens here, but I'm not really getting much out of seeing it again. And again, I agree that like it disconnects itself from reality. It doesn't quite feel like it's what you'd see in the day-to-day lives of detectives. But it's making a point that it makes well. So I'm a bit torn on it really, but I think overall it deserves the praise it gets. So.
Generally speaking, there is a lot of humour in this episode. So obviously that being one example, but there's also the scene with Landsman and Rules where Landsman is telling them the story where he was like wanking and with beer in one hand, and obviously Jimmy McNulty pops into his head. Like, that's a really funny scene. And one of the reasons that's quite funny actually is like you can kind of see it framed to make Landsman look pitiable when he's telling that story, because it's shot in such a way that he looks very lowly, and Landsman fills the screen when you see him in a sort of cinematographic. I'm not sure what the word is there.
Cinematographic. I think we'll go with that.
So, and then when we see Rules on screen, the desk takes up most of the shot, and he is seen as being kind of high up and obscured in a little way. Like, it kind of makes Landsman appear pitiable. I thought that was a really nice use of framing to kind of just intensify Landsman's story, which really was very funny.
Yeah, no, he's an absolute wordsmith.
It's a brilliant performance as well.
Yeah, I mean, very, very good monologues. Both D'Angelo's and Jay's were fantastic. Like, they're very, very easy to listen to. But it's a weird one. I think both Rules and Landsman are rounded out very well in these scenes, because they both become very likeable. I mean, it's nice just to see Rules being able to sit down and enjoy a little bit of a kind of light-hearted story with Jay, a little laugh, and seeing that he is reasonable, and that he, as long as Jimmy does only give 2 weeks or takes 2 weeks for the detail, he'll be willing to welcome him home with open arms. So
Another moment of humour that stuck out for me was when we see Bubbles sort of getting into McNulty's car and Greg's.
So what?
Greg's obviously asked him about No Heart Anthony.
No Heart, yeah.
And, she doesn't know he isn't.
camaraderie.
McNulty gives a great kind of description demonstrating his knowledge. Just Bubbles, just Bubbles' reaction there is just really funny. I just really think that's a great scene.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. No, it's some really funny stuff in here. Just like I quickly go on to the next bit.
Yeah, let's move on to the next one, yeah.
Yeah. Right, so we see another brief glimpse of Omar in this episode, although it is only brief. He's hanging out with his boyfriend Brandon and his crew member Bailey. And we learn here that he's concerned about the heat in the west side following the raid that he performed last episode. And he decides that they need to rob some drug dealers on the east side until the heat cools over in the west. And he has good reason to be wary because Avon puts out a hit on Omar with every intention of displaying the corpse for the whole neighbourhood to see. So, I mean, my take on this was, I thought was pretty good. It was a nice scene to uncover more about Omar. We already see from his very kind of grassroots depiction last week, we already see that he's now not adhering to convention, already set up here as an openly gay gangster who's willing to help out members of the community who need help. In this case, Shirley, who has an addiction but not enough money or bills or has bills to pay. And we get a sense immediately that his game is more than just money for him, and that he's got a bigger agenda going on that we're intrigued to learn more about. So I thought that it was a nice teasing scene, really, that really swiveled what we learned about Omar from last time round. Although for you, perhaps it set Omar on the path to less than enjoyment for you, because I know that the eventual kind of herald of Omar becomes too much for you, doesn't it? From what you were saying last week.
Well, you make it sound like I'm overcome in some way. Like.
Yeah, perhaps I put that in too grandiose terms, but it's kind of at the start of the Omar transition, at least, into this Robin Hood character.
Yeah, these Omar scenes are interesting. They are very well done. I think they're very enjoyable scenes. It's interesting how obviously we see the follow up with Brandon and him saying that he messed up, and Omar doesn't want his name on the street because he thinks it might come back to hurt Brandon in some way.
Yeah.
Which, again, kind of seems a bit strange when we're seeing it from perspective how, surely people already know his name, and if they know his name, then they'll likely already know Brandon. Like, he's not hiding away, he's just on a street corner with him.
Yeah. I mean, this is the exact line that I mentioned last week, is the one that they try to use to justify Omar calling out last week. And I'm glad you agree, it just doesn't quite work, does it? Particularly when you see that Greggs and McNulty discuss No Heart Anthony later on, and McNulty said that he knew him back in the early 90s, 10 years prior to when they were, and he'd been watching The Ghetto ever since, and he still didn't, when McNulty was clueless about Omar as well, and it didn't seem to ring true. So, again, those sort of plot holes surface again. And
it's something that I had forgotten, is that you mentioned that obviously Bubbles brings it up. It brings up No Heart Anthony in the car with Greggs. He also describes Omar as Omar the Terror.
Yeah, which is ripping and running out here for you.
I mean, that's quite a title. He doesn't want people to know his name, and yet Bubbles knows him as Omar the Terror. Like, yeah, that makes him sound like some kind of Ottoman tyrant.
That's very true. I just didn't buy it at all when Greg said, who's Omar? It's just kind of, I just know you're you're a competent policewoman who's very dedicated to these ghettos like McNulty. It doesn't quite work, does it?
And then we see the Robin Hoodization of Omar as well. This idea of kind of this woman comes with her child and her check is late.
Yeah.
This could be seen as obviously a nice act for him. He's sort of giving to the downtrodden, and they approach him in this almost sort of revered fashion. He's kind of there on the stoop with his boyfriend in one arm and his his bodyguard in the other. He's almost like on this throne, and he is approached by this woman. Oh, Mr. Omar, my child is sick. It's almost like a biblical scene.
Yeah, and the way he strokes the baby as well, it's kind of shines down his light upon him,
But I think it's not as, I think it's a little bit of a broken halo, because he provides what is essentially dope for this woman and her child, which kind of seems to run alongside what we hear about Bodie earlier on from his grandmother, about how he got into the game because he was dragged around by his mother, who kind of was on the fringes of the game, and that's how he got into it. That child that woman has, like, we can kind of see a possible similar story there. Yeah, I don't think it's particularly responsible of Omar to kind of be giving these people dope.
No, I mean, I think it was noble intention. Like, in the short term, this woman is, having a really bad fix for heroin, and he sorts her out, sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, it is. Yeah, there's a lot of grim implications to it. Having said that, though, do you know who this woman is or who the baby is? And it kind of there's no official answer to this, but it's always a theory that I've liked to believe in, and it kind of feeds into you identifying Michael last week on like a street corner.
Okay.
And so the baby being Bug and the woman being Michael's mother.
That's an interesting idea, yeah.
That's an interesting idea, right? Because I think the actresses, I'm not sure if they're the same, but they're very similar looking. And this
wouldn't
season
surprise
is set
me.
It's set 4.5 years before season 4, in season 1. And, it's feasibly enough time for Bug to age to junior school age. And if this does work out the way I've intended here, like, it almost creates a lovely mini arc for Michael's mum, as we see her here, like, in a clearly better early stage of heroin addiction. And then eventually we'll see her down the road. Bug's grown up a bit, she's lost lots of weight, and she's started showing severe physical signs of heroin addiction. And I just thought I did try and compare the actresses, and that they do look different because she's lost so much weight in season 4. But you'd expect that, it's all part of the heroin process. So that was I thought that was if that was what they intended, it's a really, really nice way of fleshing out the Michael family.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
I think that we can accept that as being the case if no one's going to say otherwise.
Yeah, I doubt anyone will be able to squeeze it out of David Simon whether that was the intention there. So we're just going to have to go. We're going to have to go with the yes on this one.
Yeah.
So I'd like to take some credit for that. But no, I like that. Have you got anything else to say about Omar? Or there's also the Avon scene where he puts a hit out on Omar.
Yes, there's a little theory surrounding that as well, isn't there? Because I know that obviously we see them playing. And they sort of seem to be split into two teams, as it were. We have Stringer and oh god, who's the other one? I've forgotten already.
It's Weebay with Stinkum.
Stinkum, that's who it is. So yeah, Stinkum right? And Stringer are in blue, are dressed in like a blue sort of basketball uniform, and then we see Avon and Weebay in orange. Now there's a certain idea that the prison jumpsuits are orange. Ergo, the symbolism is that those wearing orange, Avon and Weebay, are in prison later on, and those wearing the darker blue, Stinkum and Stringer, are both like dead later on.
Yeah, it's really, really nice.
So if that's the case, then that's another interesting sort of calling forward to further events, which is a massive spoiler, by the way. But we already went through spoilers, so.
Yeah, it still feels painful to give away big spoilers, though, even though we kind of solidified the policy. But yeah, that's really nice, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if they planned it out like that, because we already know how consistent the characterization is, bar Omar. So I guess that just speaks to their very, very tight plotting, and it's really nice bit of kind of foreshadowing, if that was the intention. I think overall, like, the scene's very dramatic way to bring Avon back. As we commented, he was like completely absent last episode.
Yeah,
and like he's there and he's in the flesh with his his abs and his pecs like sorted out. Establishes like some real tension as the Brandon storyline kicks into gear. And there's also that lovely imagery at the end with Stringer setting up the basketball shot and Avon dunking it.
Kind of solidifies Stringer's position as his number 2.
Yeah. And kind of puts the Brandon hit into play, although we won't actually see much of that until next episode. But it's kind of it's saying like these guys are already dead. It's just a matter of time. Like,
yeah.
So yeah, it's a very, very nice short scene.
I think that's that whole strand now, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Move on.
So let's move on. I'm liking this format so far. It's a
bit more fluid.
Really keeping. Yeah, absolutely. So. Where are we now? Well, this is another short one. We got our first glimpse of the suburbs. I think one of the only glimpses we ever get in the show, to be honest, but it was nice to see them. So with all the greenery and large detached houses and sunlight and sunshine and soccer games and Jimmy's ex-wife Elena and Jimmy's kids Michael and Sean, and we also kind of get a sense of the tensions between them that have been hinted at through various conversations so far. But we finally get to see him in the flesh, which I think is really, possibly one of my favourite scenes in the episode, actually. Just for the sake of kind of contrasting it, it's nice that he brought Bubbles with him, because it really kind of solidifies how removed certain parts of cities are from other parts of cities.
Yeah.
And the fact that Elena couldn't quite bring herself to shake his hand. I mean, which you can kind of buy from the way she's living. So, yeah, it was just a really nice scene for me. Did you have any thoughts?
It's a nice collection of scenes, and it reinforces, again, the idea of that inequality. And we were talking about wealth inequality being shown in various places, both between the lives of people in their personal lives, but also between, for example, departments in the police, or between the FBI and the police. Those kind of examples of that. Yeah. And this is another really good, continuation of that idea, which runs throughout the whole show, really, for all 5 seasons. And we get to see, confusion on the part of Bubs. He's not really kind of been accustomed to having these kind of... He's not really used to those kind of opportunities. I think that's what it is. It's like a sort of opportunity inequality. He's never really had the chance to do anything like that. Yeah. He's kind of really only known one very specific life, and he gives that line that is the epigraph, which no doubt we will talk about a bit, about it being a thin line between heaven and here. Yeah. We do see a lot of that in this episode. It's quite heavily emphasised, and this scene kind of anchors that theme for the episode.
It connects with a great Dookie line in season 5. How do you get from here to the rest of the world? Yeah. And that's definitely kind of speaking on it. I mean, I'm not sure if I buy Bubbles not knowing what soccer is, but it certainly made...
Well, I don't think he says that he doesn't know what soccer is. It's more just kind of like, he's like, what? Why are you late for soccer? Like,
yeah, it's like, what?
He doesn't see the connection between McNulty and that,
Yeah, it's like, well, I guess the idea is that McNulty lives in the suburbs. Well, his family at least live in the suburbs, and that means they have time for leisure, and that they can put their resources into having fun. And that's probably something that's very alien to Bubbles, who probably has to spend most of his life wondering where his next fix is going to come from.
Yeah, that's his leisure time.
Yeah,
his leisure time is getting high.
Yeah,
married to the needle now, boy.
Yeah, so it's great how it completely puts these people at odds. And
I must apologise for these occasional impressions that we do. None of them are particularly good. But we're going to do them, okay? Unashamedly. They're just going to come up every now and again.
Yeah, we'll work on the American accents. We'll get there eventually. The Baltimore one's particularly hard to nail down.
Do you get the occasional wire quotitis as well, where there's a particular event in your life, and for some reason there's a wire quote that suits it perfectly, and it just comes out? And sometimes people will know what you mean, sometimes they won't.
Most of the time they're not Wire fans, and you will be frowned upon, but inside you're still happy with yourself. So,
well, it happens with lots of TV shows and films and stuff like that. There's just lines in them that just sync up with something going on, and you can't help yourself.
No, absolutely.
The Wire is one of those shows, for sure.
The Wire is incredibly quotable as shows go, so it really works well. I was just quickly going to talk about, while we're on this scene, the transitions between scenes.
Yes, some lovely segues.
These come up a lot. I think that some episodes aren't particularly strong with them. Some episodes go to town with their transitions. This is the first one I've noticed so far in our rewatch where you get some really nice ones. So, from this suburban shot, we have a direct cut from kids playing a very nice structured game of soccer in the sunshine to ghetto children playing kind of an improvised game of chase around some homeless person in the darkness. As McNulty pulls up to drop Bubbles off back on the west side, and it's just such a fantastic drawing the stark kind of lines between the heaven and the here, as Bubbles is about to say. So I thought that was fantastic. You also have the dirty mop water in the juvenile facility, which immediately cuts to the coffee cup in Herc and Carver's Crown Vic, kind of perhaps talking about the power relationship between the cops and the criminals. And we also have the one scene that we go for the low rises, where D'Angelo gives us his great monologue about the tap tap tap. The camera zooms up from the low rises and then looks over at the downtown skyscrapers as Phelan and Burrell sit down for their little check-up chat on the detail, which I thought was another lovely sort of, here's lots and lots of inequality transition, like that sort of thing. So those three really stood out to me as, you know, really beautiful, really. So
yeah,
there we go.
The next bit then.
The next bit. Right, we've kind of already talked about this, but I'll quickly recap it for the sake of a recap. We get the final appearance of Mahone, who's rashly decided to leave the department following his punch from Bodie. He's worked out that claiming an injury-based pension will secure him with more money, and he intends to retire to Florida to cream some more money off of his brother's video rental shop. Polk is sad to see Mahone go, and seriously considers throwing himself down the stairs of the City Hall basement to claim a fraudulent medical pension. He's eventually stopped when McNulty and Greggs come back and at an inconvenient moment, and he's left to sit with the detail for a bit longer. Anything to say about that, or have we mostly covered that? I don't think we've quite covered the step, injury attempt scene, which is kind of funny but also ridiculously tragic.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I don't really have loads more to say on that. I think we pretty much covered it. I mean, it's just them being comic relief in a way, isn't it? Like, I mean, it's tragic comic relief, I guess, but
yeah, it's almost beyond the realms of reality comic relief, but it's still funny. And it's nice that the show doesn't stick Polk and Mahone around for too long, because I don't think they'd quite work in a long-term context. But I did notice on this run through that as Polk's about to throw himself down the stairs, McNulty and Greggs come back, and McNulty says, "We're going to have to sell this, you know." And it's kind of like, you know, it speaks to Polk at that very point. Is he really going to be able to get away with this by throwing himself down the stairs? You know, that he legitimately. But while McNulty and Greggs are talking about selling the whole pager intercept thing, so it's a nice kind of bit of synergy there.
Yeah, he's got to sell his dive.
Yeah. So there's that. Let's go on to that Judge Phelan.
Yeah. And
Judge Phelan is unhappy with Burrell's token raid efforts to appease his concerns, and asks for much more. Daniels and Burrell eventually agree that the usually unorthodox long-term surveillance methods will be necessary. Unfortunately, though, we learn through an excellent Jay Landsman soliloquy that homicide is clawing for him, and he'll need to wrap up his McNulty will need to wrap up his work in 2 weeks if he is to be welcomed home and avoid reassignment. So this feeds into the whole Jay Landsman speech that we've been through, but we also have the Burrell and Judge Phelan chat.
Yeah, we see a little bit of the scratching of backs going on there, where they're talking about getting money for the police department. And it's obviously, we see just how poor the Baltimore Police Department is when all of their sort of blood testing equipment that Burrell describes as being, 25 years old nearly. And then a failure in one of the fridges or something has spoiled a load of blood samples. We just see kind of elements that, unforeseen elements. It's not always just about the human element. The show kind of reminds you that there's sort of a random element to the problems that happen as well.
And I think he's trying as hard as possible to make sure Phelan kind of empathises with his job and that he won't treat him too harshly. But clearly Phelan is on a bit of a rampage for some results, and it's nice that he's not just appeased by some token efforts at hand-to-hands and a few little seizures. It's nice that there is a semi-McNulty somewhere else in the justice system that we can kind of root for. So,
and there's a idea that whether or not, because Burrell likes to play golf in his office, and he's obviously talking about it later on. And there's this idea that whether or not he hits or misses his shots in golf is whether or not he's succeeded in his sort of political movings. And obviously we see him miss the shot in the golf, and obviously we see him, getting a bit of an earful from Judge Phelan.
Yeah, no, it's true.
There's a certain harmony there.
Absolutely. There's, I think, normally, like, Burrell probably has maybe 6 or 7 of these golf kind of fate moments in the show, and I think he only ever pots 1 or maybe 2 of them. I can't quite remember what the circumstances were, but he has perhaps one time in season 4 where he does make a political success, or at least a political success move, and I think he might avoid being fired by Carcetti. That might be it, something to do with that. But yeah, he, as we can see from these golf shots, are a good tally or an indicator of how successful a politician he is, and unfortunately most of the time he always sees the shit end of it.
Yeah.
So
he doesn't see a whole load of success, does Burrell?
No, but you know, he's very competent at what he does. I think it just speaks to how rigged the game is the higher the ladder up you go. So there we go. I've got one more strand in the recap, and then we can probably talk about our favourite scenes and epigraphs, and perhaps our criticisms, just to finish things off. What do you reckon?
Yep.
Okay, so our final strand, Freeman follows up the pager number he found last episode and confirms that it belongs to D'Angelo Barksdale. He eventually reveals himself as the most useful member of the detail thus far, and finally begins communicating with the other members. McNulty feels compelled to buy such a natural policeman a beer, and it's during their drinks that he's advised to not tell any bosses where he wants to be reassigned, following the detail. However, as we know from episode 1, he may have already let the cat out the bag by slipping his opinions about the Marine unit to Jay.
Yeah.
So this is all Freeman stuff, who finally steps up and becomes kind of a major player in this episode.
I found it a little bit strange how obviously we see Lester toying with D'Angelo and getting him to answer the phone. But then later on, when he presents it to the rest of the detail, he puts a photo on the desk of D'Angelo answering the phone. So who
taken from a roof as well?
Yeah, taken from a position that wasn't where Freeman was. So who takes that photo?
Yeah,
how did he get that photo?
Yeah, I guess we have to assume that he did a lot of work involving going up on a roof and getting a proper shot of it. But yeah, it's strange actually, because he had a very clear view of him and he could have just snapped a little picture from his car. But yeah, it almost felt too photoshopped and airbrushed, didn't it? It was like, here I found a perfect shot, and I'm going to plonk it down in front of you.
Not only that, but we're kind of led to believe that he worked alone, so it's not like someone else could have taken the picture for him or anything, because it's not from the right angle, it's from like a completely different angle. So yeah,
no, it's true. I mean, it's not too inconceivable to be able to phone someone and then quickly pick up your camera, but yeah, it's not something I've really thought about, but yeah, I guess it pays off.
It's just a funny little thing. I guess it's fairly trivial, but
no, absolutely. But no, it's good that people have got the eagle eye for it.
But generally speaking, across this strand, we see that Freeman is, very much like McNulty. He's basically sort of an older, wiser, just as stubborn version of McNulty, who, they find an ally in one another. But I think also Freeman imparts some useful advice, mainly obviously what you were saying about him keeping his mouth shut, which naturally McNulty is far too late for him to hear that.
Yeah,
which is very typical McNulty.
Fate is sealed. Yeah, I mean, Freeman for me was great in this episode. I particularly loved another scene of great humour, where he waits a few seconds just to see if anyone else has come up with a pager number when Daniels asks where we can get one, and then he'll deliver his satisfying killer blow as he reveals it. And, like, you can see the satisfaction ride on his face, and he knows that he's been the most effective member. I mean, McNulty and Greggs might get more points for effort, but in terms of pragmatic usefulness, Freeman's by far done the most. He's despite not communicating, so it's just a really strange situation for him.
Yeah, he does revel in his ability to sort of jump out of the woodwork with something. Yeah, he really takes a bit of a sort of a necessary level of delight in seeing everyone else go, "How the hell did you do that?"
And the way he sits on his high horse with his French furniture and his jazz, I think everyone else
and
looked at him
4
with contempt,
months.
But yeah, he knows that he's on top there, so it's quite funny, really. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah, it's quite a sort of basically. I mean, a lot happens for the detail in it, but it's not a particularly well covered strand in this episode. There's not lots of time dedicated to it. Mainly
He
near
only
the
comes
end.
along at the end. Really, yeah. It's nice that he knows the all the pager intercept information as well, and that they get to educate the detail as well as us about what that really means.
Yeah.
So, although Herc does make a good point about why they don't unask a few donors for cell phones, and I'm pretty sure that it was Ed Burns and David Simon who said that they know that the pages aren't accurate for 2002 setting, but because they worked in the 80s and 90s when pages were being used, they wanted to draw from what they knew, so they kind of stretched the feasibility of pager usage just for this season, just so they could kind of, follow their kind of autobiographical arcs to the police work. So
Okay.
So yeah,
That seems reasonable. It doesn't feel like a problem for the show.
Yeah, it's actually good at making season 1 feel like it was back in the day.
Yeah, it does.
When you get to season 5, you feel like a lot of time's passed, and that the world's kind of really modernised. So I think it's quite a nice choice. So that covers our recap discussion. A bit longer than our normal recaps.
There was one or two sort of small extra things, if I might add on.
Sure.
I think it's nice how, and this gets introduced a fair bit in this episode. Obviously, we see Omar and his sort of very bold homosexuality. Like, obviously, he has his boyfriend, and he kind of everyone kind of really knows that he's gay, but he kind of carries it. It doesn't really matter. Like, his character is not defined by that because he's Omar. It doesn't matter if he's gay. He just carries himself above that, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And then
absolutely,
we have a similar thing with Greg's, where there's the scene, the final scene is obviously her getting a little bit hot and heavy with Cheryl.
That's it.
And but again, Greg's is not defined in any way by her sexuality. We just kind of see that she talks about it and that people ask her questions about it, but she's not defined by it in any way, and I think that's just a nice aspect of the show. That it's one thing that I do quite like about the show. Same with Rules, actually. I mean, we find out that Rules is gay later on, and it's an aspect of their character, but it's also kind of it's very underplayed, which I think is nice.
It's kind of a trivial fact when in the broader sense of their character, isn't it? Which is what you want. And
I do find that some shows do have a tendency to have a sort of LGBT character for whatever of whatever part of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And then there's a little bit of emphasis placed on it. And The Wire doesn't do that, and I feel like that works better for me. I feel like there's nothing wrong with a character being gay, and by that extent, it should also not define their character. Yeah,
I mean, if you were asked to describe McNulty or Omar, like you'd use their sexuality as like the 30th or 40th word, I think. I mean, it really doesn't come up as a big thing.
How would you describe Clarence Royce? Well, he's straight. So that should just tell you everything you need to know. It's just a ridiculous idea, really.
No, again, it does reflect how well the character has been built as very, very multifaceted people, and once you have so many facets, each one becomes kind of small and insignificant on its own. So the sexuality is just not a big thing. It's there, but it's it's not at the forefront, which is really nice.
Is there anything else you wanted to add?
As far as our recap section, no, but I mean, we have got some more to discuss in terms of criticism, favourite scene, standout character, title and epigraph. So should we spend the last kind of 15 minutes or so going through those?
Yeah, let's deal with criticisms.
Yeah. So
we've mentioned a couple already, actually.
Yeah, a couple of on-the-nose moments. Mahone, the allergy towards work, funny, but kind of beyond the realms of reality. And that exchange in the hospital, I agree with you, doesn't quite feel genuine, but is funny, so I'll give it a free pass. But it's still a valid criticism, I think.
And also maybe the famed fuck scene, maybe going a little bit too far and maybe sort of overstaying its welcome a little bit as a scene.
I think it's just the curse of rewatching. It's not the sort of thing that I'd have at all thought the first time round. But yeah, it does lose something when you see it again and again. Again, we've talked about the Omar plot hole. I had this one noted down.
Yeah.
It continues to rear its head in places, and even McNulty, who makes it his goal to watch the project, isn't aware of who Omar is, yet manages to recall plenty about the operations of his brother from 10 years prior. So it doesn't quite add up. And then I also had a little bit about the thin line between heaven and here, but we'll come to that in short.
Well, we'll deal with that because it's the epigraph, so...
Yeah. And then I also talked about that death scene as well, with Sidna.
Yeah.
Which again is, I mean, it's very, very subjective whether that's a criticism or not, but I didn't quite think there was enough logic in that scene for it to make sense to me.
But generally speaking, it is the best episode so far.
Oh yeah,
it's a very, very strong episode.
We told ourselves that we'd make 3 or 4 points to discuss when we watch each episode, but I couldn't make any less than 12 or 13 points for this episode. Like, there was just so much to talk about. So yeah,
always lots of note taking.
It's a good one. Yeah, absolutely.
So favourite scene.
Favourite scene. Again, difficult, very difficult. Both the monologues, very good. Tap, 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 and the addicted to himself ones. Very nice development for Jay, who's put in kind of this, as you say, he's put in this kind of submissive position. Both rules is given a nice rounding out. That he is just a guy you can go and talk to if you want to kind of have a little shoulder to cry on. Although you do kind of have to be in his pocket and kind of his pet to get away with it, but it's still kind of nice to see it. And we also have McNulty, who really kind of establishes the tension within him. So we see that he's an admirable detective, but reprehensible in the way he faces authority. And Landsman spells that out in as many words in his soliloquy. So those two for me really are on the top. The fuck scene, maybe. I really do like it despite its shortcomings. And then desk scene and soccer scene, other strong contenders. But I'll put the monologues there for me, I think. What about you?
Well, I pretty much agree with all of that, but I would also give an extra shout out for the scene where Bodie escapes the juvenile facility, because the kind of the way the shot starts with sort of the way we see a first person perspective, and that first person perspective kind of continues on for much of the scene. So we see the guy looming over him saying that he needs to kind of get dressed and don't mean any later than dinner or whatever it is he says. And then he sort of gets up to start to leave, and he uses that mop bucket thing as a sort of cover. But there's some really nice shots in it because it's almost entirely without dialogue. After that, what is he, like a probation officer or something?
Yeah, just one of the probation officers who comes over, and he makes it clear that the boys in here aren't friendly and that they're all from DC. And
there's a really nice shot of the other kids looking at him. You basically just see these really kind of like sinister looks on their faces, just staring towards him, and it kind of emphasizes the childlike nature of it because it's a juvenile facility. It's kind of like you're in the playground and all the kids are just kind of looking at you. Like something about that really kind of called back to childhood in some way. Maybe it's because maybe people were staring at me a lot in childhood. I don't know.
No, I think everyone goes through it at some point. So.
Maybe I was just a very paranoid child.
We'll never know.
Don't look at me. But yeah, there's some nice cinematography in that scene, and we see that again, the continued first person perspective as he's kind of like looking between the doors as he leaves. And again, it's just done all silently, and I just think that's quite an effective scene. Maybe not the best scene in the episode, but I wanted to give a little shout out for it. Ends with a nice segue, obviously, the dirty mop bucket water and the coffee that we see later on. Yeah,
and I assume you buy that he can get out of the facility. Like, you didn't feel that it was hilariously undermanned.
I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I don't really know anything about the kind of security they have in juvenile facilities, so it's hard to really tell. I mean, it's easy for a layman to look at that and go, well, they should have this and that and this and that, but I guess one of the things The Wire is trying to demonstrate is that these institutions don't necessarily run in the way people expect them to, because we kind of assume that anyone in those positions knows exactly what's going on and they've got it all figured out, and that's not the case. Everyone's just like the first scene, the scene after the opening credits emphasizes this. People are pulling in different ways. They don't even if they have good intentions or they seem to have expertise, that doesn't mean that things are necessarily going in one direction, or even a good direction if there is one. And I feel like sometimes in a scene like that where Bodie gets out, it could seem like it's a little bit easy for him to do so, but without really being certain of what the situation is with the juvenile facility or whatnot, there could be a whole host of reasons why it's that way.
Yeah, no, I thought it was very viable, and it was nice that Bodie was able to think quick on his feet and masquerade as the cleaning man, which clearly aided his escape. But it does kind of defy one of the major plot holes that all shows are guilty of using, or many shows are, where someone manages to get killed because there's no guards around miraculously. But in this case, it works really well because it feeds into the idea that institutions are very flawed and that no one's in the place where they should be at the right time. So that McNulty and Herc are the best example of that when they arrive 1 second too late. It's I think it's quite nice. And it's a very good scene. Again, like the cinematography is quite subtle, so I hadn't really thought about how those first-person shots actually add a lot to that scene, but they really do. Particularly when he's looking into each of those cells, and there's just those piercing eyes staring back at him.
Yeah,
it's kind of intimidating stuff. So that's favourite scenes. Have you got any other ones that were of strong mention, or should we go to our next category?
No, let's move on.
Okay, so I'll ask you what your standout character was this week, or who your standout character was. Sorry.
This is a tough one this week because there's a lot of great performances,
and no one really got a lot of screen time. Daniels has been dominating the past couple of episodes, but he was barely seen anywhere this time round. D'Angelo had one scene, Avon had one scene, so it's difficult, isn't it?
I think that because we haven't really talked about him much until this episode, really, and I think he's quite an underrated character on the show, I'm going to throw it out for Jay Landsman this week.
Oh, lovely.
I think just generally speaking, the character of Landsman is wonderfully portrayed, and this episode is a brilliant example of that. It really is. And it's a great scene, especially between him and Rules. It's it's genuinely kind of heartwarming. Even if it's a little, his kind of lack of shame is weirdly endearing.
Yeah.
I'm throwing it out for Landsman this week. I think he kind of shows off his character very well. Shows off his relationships with his minions, as he probably sees them in Bunker McNulty.
Yeah, he has two very strong scenes. And you're almost making me regret for not picking him myself. Actually, it's weird. It's not the sort of person you'd think of. But
most people don't really kind of, when you talk about great characters in The Wire, Landsman very rarely comes up, and that's because obviously he doesn't play as much of a larger, his role isn't as big. He doesn't have a massive impact on people in the show.
He's universally loved, though. I don't think I've come across someone who really didn't enjoy him as a character.
He's a fantastic character.
As you say, he's kind of the guy in the office who pops up every now and again. And that's almost his problem, I guess, yeah.
He has a kind of comic relief element as well, actually, throughout the series.
Yeah, he's very sharp-tongued. Which keeps
he's always reading his porno mags and
yeah, that lack of shame carries on. Yeah, for me, it was difficult again. I go with Freeman. I just thought it was very satisfying to see him prove himself, and roll back that
satisfying for him
almost.
Maybe.
Satisfying
for Freeman.
Very satisfying for me and for him. I really kind of I was on his wavelength there when he landed that pager number. I was like, yes, Freeman. And it's a hugely monumental time for him because he's just come out of a hibernation that's lasted 13 years 4 months. So he deserves a bit of recognition on his resurrection day.
And he likes to emphasise the 4 months.
Absolutely. Not quite sure why, but there we go. So that was my pick.
Okay. It's a good choice.
Thank you.
So title and epigraph.
Is good for you?
Mm-hmm. It's a thin line between heaven and here.
starting with the title, which obviously diverges somewhat from previous episodes, by not starting with the.
Shaking it up a little bit. Old cases. Again, there's normally, or at least in the first season, there's normally quite an obvious element to the title. So we have the Crescent case.
Yeah, that's the obvious old case, isn't it?
The obvious old case. I struggle to think of too many others. I could think of 3 characters who you could class as old cases. Those being Poke, Mahone, and Freeman. 2 of which are kind of off to the dead, and 1 of which is kind of back from the dead.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it.
And they're just kind of old guys who are having big changes in their life at this point. So I just thought that was kind of a slightly more interesting reading of the title. But
I would add that there's also other mentions of it where, for example, Marvin at the start, Greggs and McNulty try and use old cases against him in order to push him to reveal information.
Yeah.
But obviously it doesn't work. Because he's so loyal, he's willing to take the years to not say anything rather than, face what he might come up against if he does give Avon away. Which presumably, whatever it is, not very nice. I mean, what he's willing to do to Omar, or eventually in the case of Brandon, it's brutal stuff, so...
Yeah.
And he's talking about an old case there in that scene, in the basketball scene where he's plotting against Omar. He's kind of talking about an old case there, I suppose.
Yeah, something coming back from back in the day. Yeah, no, those are certainly very valid readings, I think.
But like you say, the ones in season 1 are kind of more obvious.
Yeah, I think the season 2 ones are the ones where it gets quite abstract, because there's certain episodes where it's just called undertow or backwash or ebb tide, and you really kind of have to think of how that ocean movement kind of relates to what's going on in the episode. And it's a little bit more interesting to discuss. So
because it's not even about, it's not about kind of being right or is that what they intended. It's more just, it's fun to try and analyse it and to try and see what we can pour out of that. It doesn't have to be accurate or based on authorial intent. It's just more, kind of creative play, isn't it, really?
It just makes it more entertaining to talk about, really. Yeah. It's just what you put in is what you get out. So, I think it's nice that we discuss these. And there we are. That leaves us with one thing left to discuss.
The epigraph, yeah. Much hailed epigraph.
Yeah, I know that we.
But don't let that stop you, Toby. I know you have much to say.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's nice that it came after Bubbles was taken to the suburbs. It fits in well. Is kind of a bit of an on the nose line for The Wire. It feels kind of obvious. It doesn't feel quite like Bubbles would say that in that situation. It just feels a bit too obvious for The Wire, I thought. I did look around for what other people were saying about it, and people have been really deep into this epigraph, and they've thought really long and hard about it. I even found an anonymous quote about this quote, which I could read out for you if you want to know. It's actually on the Wire wiki, and he says Bubbles, or he or she says, Bubbles is describing the physical short distance between the slums and suburbia, as well as the philosophical distance in that the two are still connected as parts of the same city, and that it doesn't take much for an area of a city to degrade. Bubbles may also be describing how it is more dangerous in the slums, and that death, and possibly heaven, could be just around the corner. So there's clearly some nice kind of deep meanings to it, but as a surface line in this really realistically constructed world, for me, doesn't quite ring true. But how do you feel about that, Alex? I'm sure you're not too far from my way of seeing things.
Well, it's just another example of a scene using its symbolism over its dramatic kind of usage. Like it's there for its mechanic almost. And obviously what he's saying rings true not just on a kind of level of the city and the citizens, but also between departments. So I guess you could say that when Freeman was in the pawn shop unit, that was kind of here, and his heaven is now moving towards the detail where he gets to do actual police work. So I guess there's kind of that line of transition within departments, within institutions as well, between institutions. So you could say the Baltimore Police Department and the FBI, that's another heaven in here. Because of, the better equipment they have or something. So I guess it's kind of calling about, that continuing theme that goes throughout the whole show about just inequality between various people, various systems, institutions, etc. I do agree that it is a bit like the show demonstrates that so expertly otherwise that it feels like it's not really necessary for the audience to hear that. But maybe it's just being thrown in because it feels like it does feel part of Bubbles' character to kind of be quite self-aware of his situation. He knows that he's not living the life, he's not ignorant to it. It feels a little bit twee as a statement, but I didn't feel like it was jarring with Bubbles as a character. It felt like something that he might say. But I do agree that it is, in terms of what it does for the audience, what they're saying there has already been very well shown in a much more tasteful manner.
Particularly with that lovely transition that we got of the kids playing the games.
Yeah, the transition speaks for itself. I mean, it really does kind of hit you a little bit. You're like, wow. It's really kind of a desperate shot. It catches you. So, yeah, maybe possibly unnecessary, but not too bad in my books.
Yeah, that's pretty much the same as how I see it, really. It's, as with a lot of things this week, there's kind of torn, really.
I think it's just sometimes you feel like you want to temper the fanaticism for certain elements of the show a little bit.
Yeah.
Because it is an amazing show, but sometimes if you're too fanatical about it, it can create a bit of a wall between you and genuine critical analysis. And depending on how much you really care about that sort of thing, some people really revel in how much they enjoy a show and how much they kind of are fanatical towards it, and that's fine.
Yeah,
but I
guess like they get really disappointed if they can admit that there are problems with it, isn't it? Kind of.
Well, it's not even that; it's that the problems don't matter. They're kind of more interested in kind of they get so involved with their fanaticism in the show, but that alone is kind of fun for them, and so be it. I mean, more power to them. But I guess because ideally we want to do more of a critical analysis of it, we don't want to be spending too much of our time going, this is amazing and this is amazing and this is amazing, because anyone who watches the show can come to that conclusion themselves, I think.
No, definitely.
Right. Well, I think we're pretty much sorted then. I think the new format has worked well.
Yeah. We will be
I
sticking
think it
with
may
this.
continue. Yeah.
Unless we get any correspondence to the contrary, but I doubt we will. So until next week.
I just also I want to add before you go. Just want to thank all of the people who have been listening to the podcast so far. I know a couple of friends of mine have been listening in and been getting some positive comments back. So thank you very much for that. It always helps. And don't forget that we will be interested in hearing any emails or anything like that at courtonthewire@gmail.com, just in case you want to add to the discussion for whatever reason.
We'll probably read your comment out if you do write into us.
Yeah, I don't see why not. I mean, unless you don't want it read out even. But
it would just add to our discussion here, really, and make it all the richer.
And we have sort of toyed with the idea of having guests on. We do know a couple of people who might be able to add to the show. I think we mentioned that already, so we might consider that maybe for season finales.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Season finales.
Every season finale, we bring a new person in, because we got a couple of people that we know obviously like the show and great to talk about it with. So
yeah, okay, so that's
for another day.
For the future. Yeah. Okay, well, thanks, Alex. That was a great discussion.
Thank you.
And we'll pick it back up next week with episode 5, the pager, I think. Yeah, the pager.
Yeah. Right.
So,
well, until then, have a good week, and we shall see you on the next episode.
See you then.
Bye-bye.
What you know about Baltimore? What you know about Baltimore? Baltimore. What you know about Baltimore? What you know about Baltimore? Baltimore. What you